Domestic abuse is one of the most widespread crimes in America. Even after decades of dedicated efforts to educate, support, and protect victims and survivors, hundreds of thousands, mostly women, are abused, battered, and killed by their husbands and partners. Most abusers follow a pattern, usually beginning by controlling in small ways, then escalating their control until, frequently, every step a victim takes is under her abuser's scrutiny. It's all about power and control. This pattern is clearly illustrated through the use of a graphic known as the Power and Control Wheel, developed by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Programs of Duluth, Minnesota. The words physical and sexual violence appear on the outside of the wheel, but physical and sexual violence may or may not be part of an abusive relationship. Often, the threat of violence, or a single episode of violence, will effectively control a victim. An abuser may use physical or sexual violence, or intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, or male privilege, economic abuse, or coercion and threats. This program contains a series of interviews with friends, relatives, and victims and survivors of domestic abuse. Using their stories and the Power and Control Wheel, you'll get a glimpse of how abusers control their victims. We'll begin with the use of intimidation.
He had put 2 bullets up on the mantelpiece in the apartment, and so every time she walked by, she saw those. And that was, and he did say to her, if you leave, he said, I will kill you. And so she had that hanging over her head. Plus, if you say anything to anybody. So she lived in that fear. And the children that lived in the house saw those. And they knew the fighting that went on. And that's the constant, prison that you live in. Yes, she came and went to work, but a lot of people didn't know what was going on inside those walls until they heard the arguing or they saw her come out.
We were at a restaurant in Bangor, and he just said a slew of horrible things to me about the way he treats her. That if she doesn't follow the rules, she knows what's going to happen, and she's already suffered, but it keeps her in line and things like that. And she was just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking in the chair. And I was just sitting there with my mouth wide open. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And then he says, very casually, excuse me, I have to go to the restroom.
She was very outgoing, just a very loving person. And afterwards that she was kind of overly submissive to him. And he just dominated her life.
He would get up early in the morning, and he would sit downstairs, and he would kind of like obsess about things that were bothering him that he felt I had done wrong, and then he would start drinking, and by the time I got up, he was in a full-blown rage, and he would start following me around the house and just keep asking me these same questions over and over again and getting more and more, upset and louder and in my face. And I would do anything to get away from him or to try and appease him. I'd ask him to stop, and I'd beg him to stop, and I'd plead with him, and I would cry. And
I was 16, and thought I was in love. There was a lot going on in my life, and I'd met this guy, and I thought we'd seen each other, and I thought he loved me. He would have people say that they had slept with me and that the baby wasn't even his. And I had been a virgin. I was not loose. And I just didn't think that was right. But I still felt that he loved me, and maybe if I showed him that I loved him and I was a little bit better, he would stop, but he didn't. It just escalated.
He could tell her where she'd go, when she would go. When I would try to get her on the phone, he would be there and tell her what to say back. Tell her what she could wear, what she couldn't wear. things had to be his way.
She had lost all her friends. She had stopped talking to everybody in the family. The first thing he did when he saw how much that Heather and I cared about each other, he turned to Heather and he said to her, "Maybe I slept with her." And which was not true in any way, shape, or form. So right there, he immediately drove a wedge between Heather and my relationship. Right there. I mean, she fell apart. And from that moment on, I could tell that she wasn't quite sure if she wanted to trust me or not.
We found out later that when Matthew and Lisa went out and she wanted to go to the ladies' room, he would escort her right to the ladies' room door and then escort her back to where they were, just domineering all the time.
He wanted to know where I was at all times. And as I said, I wasn't allowed to see the people that I used to see, that I used to hang around with. I had to hang around with him and his family.
Jeffrey had never allowed Mindy to get a license. He took her anywhere she wanted to go, according to him, so she didn't need a license. Because we all found out later on that it was all part of his control mechanism to try, to determine where she was and who she was seeing.
It's over a period of time that they isolate you from your friends and your family. And I learned early on in our relationship that those types of conversations with friends, I mean, he had overheard me once talking to a friend, and afterwards I was punished severely for that. And so I learned those types of things are private. You don't talk about, wasn't supposed to talk about my relationship with him to other people. It was private. It wasn't allowed. So I kept it all, I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't go to anybody. I didn't talk to my doctor about it. I didn't tell anybody. I think he still believes to this day it was all my fault. Everything bad in his life is my fault. After the abuse, they're the ones that are there for you and tell you, I'm so sorry and I love you, and they're, taking care of you. So it's really hard to understand this person who was just beating you 2 hours later is the one who's taking care of you and cleaning up your wounds and your bruises and everything. So it's just a lot of crazy making stuff in your head.
She would be submissive, and very often I would see things that I didn't like, and she said, no. She said, it's my fault. Whatever happened there was my fault, not his. And I'd think to myself, I don't see that. We went skiing one time in Montage Mountain in Pennsylvania, and they had, of course, the bunny slope there, and Lisa had never skied before, and the ski instructor was a young, good-looking guy, and you could just see Matthew just steaming and boiling inside. And they were going to go back the next day and do some more skiing, and that just never happened. And I'd say, Lisa, why not? It's my fault, we're not going because it's my fault. And it wasn't.
I knew I was a good person. I knew I was a morally upright person. But he made me feel that I was, lower than dirt, and that I was scum of the earth. Well, one day my sister, my oldest sister, and my brother-in-law tried to come and get me. He had beat me really bad, and I called my sister and I said, please come and get us. And I had gone to a different house down the road, and when they came to get me, he had arrived back home because he had taken off after he'd beat me. He arrived back and he saw who was coming down the road, so he knew I was trying to escape. And he came and he grabbed my daughter out of my hands and he said, you're not taking her. You'll never see her again. So I had to stay. I wasn't going to let him raise my baby.
When I got there, the police had just arrived, had set up some crime scene tape. And I was there at least to make sure that our girl didn't have to come onto the scene and find her 22-month-old son in in that horrendous, bloody bedroom changed everything really. In just a split second, went from a nice, peaceful, beautiful December reality to a nightmare. A nightmare that to some extent continues even now. You know, it was something that was unreal to me. I couldn't understand the taking of any life. But I really, really couldn't understand how somebody could take a innocent child and hold him down and shoot him in the back of the head.
I think there's still that the man is the boss and the woman is supposed to listen and obey and do what she is told. But that isn't how it's supposed to be. Love isn't supposed to leave bruises. It isn't supposed to destroy.
We would have conversations, we would talk, and he would answer. He would not let her speak. Why can't Heather answer that question? Because I know what she's going to say. She and I think alike. Okay, I'd like to hear from her mouth. And she would be hesitant.
Before, I mean, you couldn't keep her quiet about anything. And when he became part of her life, that part of her completely went, and she started to become very quiet, and her posture changed. Instead of being very upright, she started to really cave in, physically cave in. She never looked up. She never looked you in the face. And he, most of the time, spoke for her, and then she would just repeat what he said. You could see that look in her eye that she really had an opinion about it, but the words that came out of her mouth were his. She was working at the hospital in Bangor, and she was working in the food department with the goal that at the time that if you worked at the hospital for so many years, you would become eligible to go into some sort of nursing program, so school. And she wanted to do that. She wanted to do it really bad. And she started working towards that goal. Every day he would go to the hospital and sit there and make a scene in the cafeteria. And it made things very difficult for her at work because she was then getting in trouble with her bosses because she couldn't get out of a fight, really, in public even. And then sometimes he would just sit there and stare at her. What ended up happening was that 1 week shy of her being eligible for the nursing program, he made her quit. He made her quit her job.
There were times when we would send up money. The problem with the money was he would take it and use it for his own personal uses. Finding ways not to go out and get a job and use the money for maintaining his lifestyle, shall we say, if you want to call it that. We opted to, when we found this out, send up gift cards for specific things in places that Heather might need. He would go out and he would spend the money at the store, buy something there, and then he would return it and get cash so he could spend the cash himself.
I mean, she didn't have a crib. She didn't have blankets. She didn't have anything because he said that was a waste of money. So she packed her bags and I imagine from things that he said to me, because he's flat out said to me multiple times that he would not allow her to leave.
Evidently, from what I understand, he had 2 bullets sitting on the mantelpiece of the apartment for a week before. So every time she'd walk by, she would see these, because he had told her if she'd ever leave him, that he would kill her. So she lived in that fear, and that's why I think she never left.
He's tried to kill me numerous times. He'd come at me with knives and threatened to slit my throat. And this is after he'd beat me. Then he's put a gun to my head once, and he said, "This is the gun I'm going to use to kill you." And I still stayed because the threat was that I would never see my little girl again. And then when I did dare to leave, he would stalk me. He would be wherever I was.
He'd grab me by, I had long hair then, grab me by the hair and drag me out to the garage, which is a detached garage that's across the driveway, and throw me against the wall in there and close the garage door. So, of course, then my daughter couldn't see, the neighbors couldn't see, and just get in my face. And, they have this tendency to, I don't know, to me, you're looking back at it, it's like he would puff up and his eyes would bulge out, and face would be contorted with rage, and he'd ask a question and he didn't get the answer he wanted, so he would just slap me across the face, and I would cower down, and he would pull me back up by the hair and ask his questions again and slap me, and then he'd throw me down on we have a cement floor, throw me down, kick me. I still can't believe he did this, but he grabbed my breast at one point and just twisted it as hard as he could, and then he would, it's very distressing to talk about this.
According to the police, she packed a bag and headed for the door, and he came at her at the door with a small knife, and she saw it coming. So she tried to block him from getting her, and she had multiple defensive wounds in her hands as she tried to push him off. But he kept coming at her, and she had small, not very deep cuts in her shoulders as she tried to back up, and a couple in her chest area. She realized she wasn't getting out of there, but she wanted Jonah to live, her baby, her son. So she turned around and ran into the corner and turned her back to him and put her arms around her belly to protect him.
So they were inside the house arguing, and Brenda had said to him, I've had it, I need a break, I need to just go away for a while. And that was when the first shot was fired, and he hit her in the stomach. She was able to run out of the house. Meanwhile, her daughter's sitting on the front steps. So her mother runs by her. She gets across the street. Her husband comes out, stops long enough to reload the rifle, shoots her in the back of the head. She's gone.
If we're silent, if we don't do anything about the violence that exists around us, if we don't begin a dialogue, if we don't begin communicating with our sons and the other young men and boys in our lives about their emotional development, about violence in our world and how it's expressed, then inevitably the cycle will repeat.
Most of the people that I've met, what they need is a lifeline. Somebody that they know they can talk to, go to, where there's a safe place.
If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call 911. There are trained advocates who can assist victims and survivors of abuse and provide support and information to family members, friends, co-workers, and other community members. The call and assistance is free and confidential.